This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com, and I have with me this morning Charles Hugh Smith, well-recognized writer on the web, who is the publisher of the website of2minds.com and no stranger to our long-term listeners. Good morning, Charles. Welcome back to Macro Analytics.
Thank you, Gordon. Glad to be here.
A new year and lots of new subjects, just too many things to talk about and not enough time to do it, right?
Yes.
Charles, but I do want to start off right away with, and I have it up here, is your new book that you have out. Make sure our listeners are familiar with it. Any comments you want to make on the book?
Well, the book title is The Nearly Free University and the Emerging Economy. And Gordon, the reason why I wrote the book was I felt that the technology in education is going to revolutionize the way that higher education functions. And I think it could make an enormous improvement in aligning the higher education sector with the emerging economy. In other words, the parts of the economy that are growing and not stagnating. And right now, I feel that there's a huge misalignment between higher education and the kind of work and entrepreneurial spirit that's needed in the emerging economy. And so the book is my attempt to kind of realign higher education and the parts of the economy that are actually thriving and growing.
We're going to do a whole show on the book, I hope, in February. I'm looking forward to that session with you, Charles. We're going to talk today about a number of articles you have, at least one article, but a number that you've been writing on concerning retail and commercial real estate. And the one that I wanted to focus on here this morning, Charles, is the first domino to fall, retail, commercial real estate. But as a lead-in to it, I also just published my annual thesis paper, and it's an extensive document, but one of the sections in it I talk about is productivity paradox and what's happening with automation, and it's very appropriate. And I have some quick slides just to set the stage, Charles, of what I'm seeing of how robotics that we've always thought of as in the factory floor is now moving in waves into the service sector. And the United States being a 70+% consumption economy and services being a huge element now as being a service economy, this is where the technology is now being targeted. And everybody's thought that this was the last bastion that couldn't be automated, and it's not. It's coming in big ways. And I don't know if you're seeing it out in California.
Yes, absolutely.
Some of the things that I've watched, just flipping through here, Redbox was the first one that I really saw. They've just completely taken over in New England from where we used to go to the video stores. Those video stores are all empty now. Now they're turned into workout centers or simply sitting there empty. And these were large stores, large square footages. But now these Redbox are everywhere, and they sit outside a 7-Eleven, a CVS, and you can pick them up and you can drop in any of our food stores. Supermarkets have all got them near the checkout. Are you seeing it out west?
Yes, they are definitely making a dent.
But it's an example of just how quickly they change an industry. They just completely put Blockbuster and everybody out of business within literally a matter of 24 to 36 months. And that wave is just going right through. You know, you walk into any of the shopping malls now, and the kiosks that are everywhere. If you can't find an item, you not only scan for your price and do it yourself. You don't ask a clerk, which is reduced number of clerks, but you might even order it online. And because you can't find quite the match that you had there in the store, ever mind everybody's well familiar amount of showrooming that has been going on where you don't like the price. People are standing right there with their cell phones or their tablets and ordering it in the store online because they can get it cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, if you go into big box stores, you certainly see that they're attempting to respond to that, but perhaps not successfully.
So what it means is that it's less square footage. The stores they're trying to cut back on their staff because it's the expensive element, but also the square footage that they need. If they can reduce it, if they can change the stocking. So they're trying to stock less in store, but be able to get it to as fast and using automation to do it. That's the real benefit of all these kiosks. The kiosks are not just labor saving. It's the inventory and costs that they're trying to save. So they're giving you more selection, but it's not there. You can pick it up at the store the next time you come back, and they've got a desk for it. You know, I'm seeing it in restaurants. Applebee's, as an example, just came out with what they call their waiter terminator. And so now when you sit at your table, you're going to have a touch screen and you select what you want off the menus, because most all these commercial franchise fast food places it's a fixed menu. So you touch screen and you order it, and so you've got maybe a third of the people required to bring it to your table. But then when you check out, it's already done. All you're doing is them making sure that you've swiped your Visa card. So it's a huge savings that's going to happen there. I'm seeing it in smoothies, for example, these automated dispensers. So it's like the ATMs in the banks, completely getting rid of floor space that you need or a retail spot, a retail store. You can put these outside or in malls or in various food mart areas. McDonald's just announced, or they've got this fast food smart restaurant that actually completely makes the hamburger. And by doing it, they say they can get higher quality. Turns out 350 of these things an hour, but more selection. And again, it's a touch screen. But Charles, I just wanted to point this out as we get into what you're seeing with the commercial real estate. The productivity tools that are now coming are changing the whole dynamics of commercial real estate, where they don't need the numbers of people and they don't need the numbers of square footage.
Yes, and I would add a couple of other factors that we've all are aware of, but that are also putting pressure on commercial real estate for other similar reasons. In other words, let's talk about the brown truck store. In other words, you really don't even have to drive to the mall. You can order it online, and then UPS or FedEx or the Postal Service delivers it to your door. And so that's an enormous reduction in need for space, because people don't need to go to the mall. And for those that do go, they're looking for the fun, the excitement, the stimulation of a crowded, vibrant center. And you don't get that experience in a mall that is filled with vacant storefronts and a smattering of other people. And so I think that there's a sort of dynamic that as the retail sector erodes, the very factors that drove the popularity of malls will decline. The social, experiential side of it is it's no longer that fun.
What I'm seeing in the malls is the anchor store, which are the Sears, the Macy's, the J.C. Penney's. They're in trouble. They're in big trouble right now. They're going to have to cut back the numbers of stores that they have and downsize, in which they already have announced, which was a cut in labor. But these malls themselves are so dependent on these anchor stores. But they're finding that these anchor stores are not bringing in the volume. So the real estate investment trusts and the owners of the malls have got problems. And when they start to cut back, the anchor stores, hold on to your hat. And so they're already out there talking to people like TJX, Burlington, Ross stores, others to replace these, because they apparently can draw in more activity. But you'll notice the price points are getting down. They're getting down to lower. The only way you can draw people into the mall right now is 60-70% discounts. What's growing are outlet malls and open air malls, which were dead before, because they're bringing in some of these other stores. We were talking before the show, at Christmas, I noticed that the traffic in the malls wasn't bad, but nobody was buying wholesale. They were going because somebody was offering a specific item at 70% off. If it didn't have a massive discount, they weren't there. But on the way home, I went by an old deserted mall that we hadn't been by in a long time, an outdoor open mall. It had been anchored by a a movie theater and a few other things that had all long since closed down. But before we got to it, we had police directing traffic up ahead, and we thought it was an accident. Turned out that wasn't an accident. It was people going in. And what had happened was they had opened up a huge dollar store in there, 3 times the size of a dollar store that I'd ever seen. And we have in New England, it's called Ocean State, which is I'll call it a regional dollar store kind of equivalent, also very, very large. There was hundreds and hundreds of cars in there. This is where they were buying their basic needs. This is a huge shift in pattern.
Yes, Gordon, and I think that's an excellent lead into this graph that you have here about where the jobs are in our economy. And of course, if we go back about a century or so, we can say that when the U.S. was largely agricultural, then about 80 or 90% of the jobs were in agriculture. And then as a result of industrialization, then about half of the jobs were related to manufacturing. And then in a post-industrial economy where the factory work was largely mechanized, with robotics and software, then about 80% of our economy is now service oriented, including retail and white-collar work, clerical, and so on. Well, as you pointed out in the beginning of our show, robotics is now moving into the service sector. It's moved out of the factory and into the storefront. And so that means that there's a tremendous number of jobs in the service sectors, including retail, that are going to be displaced by robotics and computers and software. It's inevitable. There's no way to stop it. And that's going to have a huge impact on jobs.
That's the key point that I'd like to make sure our listeners really fully appreciate. And because I've seen in New England, Charles, when I came here, we were and I came here because of the technology. We were a technology leader, and DEC had 300,000 people. Wang had 150,000. Data General had 100. I can keep on going. We had more places that were employing 50,000 and making technology, whether computers or communications. Well, we all know that 2000, the tech bubble burst, and things started to change. Well, the next thing I started to notice is all those people that got hundreds of thousands of people that got laid off. Where did they find work? Well, I started noticing before the 2008 real estate bubble burst that they were finding themselves selling real estate. They were doing mortgage brokers. They were doing they were started contractors where they were doing home renovations, kitchen cabinets, etc. Different types of business. I would trip over people that I knew from my days in technology because they couldn't relocate. They couldn't find work, but this is where they had found work. Their salaries had come down dramatically, but they were getting by, and things were sort of all right. Well, what I've noticed since 2008, and it's been happening actually for the last 12 years, is we've just had an explosion of retail building, of big box stores in chains everywhere. No matter how bad the economy was, there was always a new large store being built somewhere around here. And when I went into them, what I have found over the last numbers of years, I was finding people that used to be in technology, then were in real estate are now working in retail. Their salaries are dramatically lower. They have no benefits. They're barely getting by, and they're hoping that they're going to survive until their pension. And this is what the hundreds of thousands of people over the last 10 years, more or less, have migrated into these retail. And if we start to see, and we're going to see the automation hit, and the costs and the structure that's changing on online services with this, where are these people going to find work next, Charles?
That is the question, Gordon, and we both fear the answer is there is no other place. This is the end of the line. And you have some slides from my article that talk about the other side of the equation, which is the tremendous overbuilding that you just described in New England. Well, of course, it's everywhere in the country, the West, South, you name it. And so for 9 years, the commercial real estate industry was building 300 million square feet a year, adding to existing retail. So you're talking about almost 3 trillion square feet. 3 billion square feet of commercial real estate added in the decade of this retail boom you described. Well, that's obviously a tremendous misalignment with the reduction in need for commercial real estate space that we've just described. In other words, you've got a classic misalignment of gargantuan proportions. Way too much retail space has been added, and it's simply not needed at anywhere near the scale that it's been added. So, and then the next series of slides is just talking about the decline in the anchor stores that you already described. That the sales to the conventional department stores have been plummeting, and for a number of different reasons. And we could talk a whole program about those. But I think perhaps the key dynamic here is that the disposable income of the average household has been declining. And you can actually say that it's been declining over time since the early 70s. And there's been several booms and busts in which household income went up temporarily. And then once the bubble burst, then of course household income declines. And the last bubble that burst, the housing bust, was so devastating on so many different levels that household income is not recovered. It's still down about 8%, and that's the median. If we look at how the income is distributed, we find that the bottom 90% of households have actually seen a decline in income over the decades, and only the top 10%, the managerial and technocratic class, has seen an increase. And so what we're really talking about is can the top 10%, which is about 11 or 12 million households, can they support the entire retail structure of the United States?
It's almost absurd to even think of it that way, isn't it, Charles?
It is.
That's how it's being planned right now.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing that we could just make quick mention of is that many of the top 10% are not free spenders. They acquired their whatever wealth and income they have by being extremely frugal. And so I think what's really going to gut retail is the loss of the middle class, the aspirational shopper who was drawn to maxing out their credit card to buy a higher visibility brand of clothing or vehicle or accoutrement. Those people's income, in other words, the people between, say, 50% and 90%, their income is being gutted. It's slowly eroding the amount of disposable income they have to spend on retail. And it's my thesis that a lot of the 10% are extremely frugal, and they really don't care how much discount you put in. They're not interested unless you can sell it for a price at which you're going to lose money.
Everybody's familiar with the tech bubble, the housing bubble, the bond bubble, but I really don't think that people are aware or fully appreciate that what we had was a commercial real estate bubble too, a stealth commercial real estate bubble. And it's been going on, and it's just now starting to change. And everybody's been aware of the student loan bubble that's been going on, and it's been getting a lot more press. But when this commercial real estate starts to go through the transition that it's going to happen, it's going to be made aware to everybody. I'm not saying, Charles, that I actually happen to believe that commercial real estate is going to collapse, because I think that there's going to be a whole series of guarantees that start to come in for guaranteeing collateral and guaranteeing some of the debts. But I think that what's going to happen is we're going to see it in the unemployment rolls as they downsize and they reduce the number of square footage. And the reason it's been going on, and I don't think everybody fully appreciates this, is that the shadow banking system has mutated, and the government has been a big proponent through regulatories allowing this to happen. And I have up here a chart. I have backup to this. This may be way too technical a discussion to have, but suffice it to say that the shadow banking system globally is a $72 trillion sized asset right now. It's larger than all the other commercial banks put together in terms of asset. It's unregulated. It's primarily offshore. It's off balance sheet, and it's run with various structured vehicles. And when I talk about mutation, and this is the thing that we need to understand in student loans and commercial real estate, is that we had a shadow banking system that was operating with something called SIV, structured investment vehicles, which was taking housing mortgages, mortgage-backed securities, asset-backed securities, putting those together into collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and then packaging with making them AAA and selling them. That everybody kind of learned about that in 2008. And it imploded because it's based on the idea that you borrow short and you lend long. And that works until money gets tight. If liquidity suddenly changes, you can't lend short, but you've got all this where you've lent out yourself money in a long basis. You can't support it. So what's happened now is this transition in the shadow banking. They've went to a whole new concept called structured financial vehicles. And what they're doing in lending short is they're using repos. And they're using something called rehypothecation, which is basically using the collateral value as an asset. And the insurance companies and the pension plans that are so dependent on yield, and matter of fact, are the biggest owners of commercial real estate. And funders, buyers have over the years, have shifted, and they're funding this by buying these repos and buying the collateral values, and that's the short-term funding. And what that's being lent long is to the real estate investment trusts through collateralized loan obligations and other instruments. It's basically just a whole mutation, and they're using things called collateral transformations to make it happen, whereas before there were credit, maturity, and liquidity transformation. Long-winded, maybe much too complex to get in, but it's hidden. And nobody's talking about it. And it's been working. And that's what has allowed this stealth explosion in commercial real estate that makes absolutely no commercial sense at all. But the credit has been there. And if you can just get credit cheap enough, you can put your competition out of business. But it's going to change, because the moment you cut back on this floor space and you start to cut back, how the funding is done on commercial real estate is completely different. And that's suddenly, you'll have somebody yelling fire, and we got another problem. And we'll have a huge collateral problem. Charles, does that make any sense to you?
You know, Gordon, you're the only analyst that I have come across who understands and can explain this correlation, if you will, between the shadow banking system and the coming implosion of commercial real estate. And I think that the 2 points I would stress that you mentioned is that these commercial real estate loans are typically 5 years, and then there's a big balloon payment. So it's not a 30-year mortgage like a house. And so that means that all the loans out there on all this commercial real estate, they roll over and they have to be refinanced. And so if it looked good 5 years ago, that was one thing. But now if you've lost your anchor tenants and half your space is empty and you're leasing it out at dirt cheap prices, the leases, the income on that mall no longer justify the valuation. And so that means that no sane lender is going to refinance your balloon payment. And I think the analogy I would use is, remember in the housing bubble, developers were building McMansions in the middle of nowhere. There were no buyers, there was no services, but the money was made in simply getting them built. And I think that that's pretty much exactly what's happened now in commercial real estate. The money was made in getting them all built, never mind if it's a functioning business or not.
The whole idea, in a lot of cases, they were going to make money on the real estate asset prices as opposed to really selling anything in the businesses in the malls. But these anchor stores in the malls have 15-year leases. They're leasers. They don't own the store. They just lease the space. And as they're cutting back and trying to get out of their leases or shortening their leases, this problem is huge for those who own the store. Those are the real estate investment trusts, etc., who've got shorter term funding needs. And suddenly what happens is the mall's not worth as much. The collateral value of that mall is suddenly plummeted, like the same as what happened in housing. And so what's different is when housing price fell down, you couldn't get a loan, but You didn't get thrown out of your house. You can make the payments. What happens here is you've got to come up with more collateral. You've got to post it, or they're not, the banks or the lenders are not going to roll the money. They don't have the collateral. They're so highly leveraged. And when somebody, as I said earlier, yells fire, we've got a huge problem. And this whole shadow banking, Charles, it's also funding the student loans, because Sally Mae structures all these loans and packages them together into collateralized loan obligations, and they float, and they're floating using the same way to float the short-term money. So when this hits, and it's going to affect our abilities even to issue student loans. So the governments, why this will not be a collapse, the governments will be forced to come in, and as they did with the last time we had the collapse, remember the 15 or 20 different derivative structures that the central bank Fed came up with to stop it from imploding, TLF, TLAs, TLBs, etc. Well, what's going to happen is they'll have to come in and guarantee it. So it won't collapse. I'm not trying to say that's going to happen, but it's going to be some significant haircuts. But it's the unemployment that's going to be the problem this time. This is what's going to hit.
And I would just emphasize something you mentioned in passing in your discussion, which was this commercial real estate problem is going to impact ultimately pensions and insurance companies. So the dominoes that are going to fall or be impacted, they stretch not just within retail or within commercial real estate, but all the way through our financial system.
The last crisis was about banks, Charles. The next one's going to be about insurance and pensions. And we have a huge pension crisis that's underfunded right now. And you start collapsing some of the collateral underlying values. And that is, and it can't be allowed. It cannot be allowed. It's much worse than 2008. So you will see regulatory arbitrage in a massive way. That is governments having to guarantee all of these collaterals, the same as we did with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but on a wholesale basis, because if the insurance and pension companies run into problems with 75 million baby boomers retiring, wanting their pensions, it's just unimaginable. But it's all going to start in the commercial real estate because of the automation and it being overbuilt and overstored based on this shadow banking system that was completely unregulated. Charles, we have to break. We're well past our hard line, but I'd really like to pick up this discussion. We talk about education. We talk about your book. Try and tie this together for our listeners. I'll try not to be too technical, but to give everybody a true perspective. And the reason, Charles, you said I'm the only one that's talking about it, it's because everybody's well aware of what's going on, but everybody's trying to make money at it. Unfortunately, it's he who doesn't understand what's going to come on is the one that's going to cost them money.
Well said. And I look forward to discussing the shadow banking and the higher education loan situation.
Thank you, Charles. Talk to you next month?
Yes.
Looking forward to it. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.